the leaky faucet. Drip. 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 The sound echoed in the otherwise silent kitchen, a relentless percussion against Agnes's frayed nerves. She tightened the faucet handle again, wincing at the protesting squeal of the ancient metal. Still, it dripped. Each drop was a tiny hammer blow, chipping away at the fragile piece she'd painstakingly constructed since he was gone. She stared at the glistening bead of water forming at the faucet's lip, a miniature mirror reflecting her own watery eyes. It wasn't just the faucet, was it? It was the peeling wallpaper in the hallway, the overgrown roses clawing at the living room window, the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunbeams, all evidence of a house slowly succumbing to neglect, a reflection of her own slow decline. A sharp rap at the back door startled her. Agnes smoothed down her apron, a pale blue garment that had seen better days, and shuffled to the door. Martha Jenkins stood on the porch, her arms laden with a casserole dish covered in foil. Martha's smile was bright, almost aggressively so, and Agnes felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. "Agnes, dear! I haven't seen you out and about. Thought I'd bring you this. Chicken and rice, your favorite." Martha pushed past Agnes, her voice booming in the small kitchen. "My goodness, what's that infernal racket?" Agnes sighed, gesturing weakly towards the sink. "The faucet. I can't seem to stop it from dripping." Martha bustled over, her ample frame filling the space. She examined the offending fixture with a critical eye. "Terrible waste of water. And the noise. Drives a body mad. You need to get that fixed, Agnes." I know," Agnes mumbled, avoiding Martha's gaze. The thought of calling a handyman, of explaining the problem to a stranger, of having someone invade the quiet sanctuary of her home, filled her with a quiet dread. Martha opened the refrigerator and began rearranging its contents, a habit that always irritated Agnes, though she never dared to say anything. "Honestly, Agnes, you can't let things go like this. This house is falling apart around you. It's been 6 months, dear. Thomas wouldn't want you living like this." Agnes flinched. It always came back to Thomas. "I'm managing," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Martha turned, her expression softening slightly. "No, you're not, Agnes. You're isolating yourself. You haven't been to the church social in weeks. You barely wave when I see you in the garden. I worry about you." Agnes looked down at her hands, gnarled with age and work. "There's just so much to do," she said, the words catching in her throat. "The garden, the cleaning, the dripping faucet." Martha placed a hand on Agnes's arm, her touch surprisingly gentle. "Let me call someone for you, dear. Old Mr. Henderson is still around. He might be slow, but he does good work and he wouldn't cheat you. I'll call him right now, before I leave." Agnes hesitated. The idea of relinquishing control, of admitting her inability to cope, was unsettling. But the thought of another night listening to the incessant drip, 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 was even worse. "All right, Martha," she relented, the words a sigh escaping her lips. "If you wouldn't mind." A tiny seed of relief sprouted within her, a fragile green shoot pushing through the hard-packed soil of her grief. Perhaps, just perhaps, a little help was what she needed. Leo arrives. The silence of the morning shattered with a metallic clang. Agnes, perched on her usual armchair, nearly jumped out of her skin. The sound, a cacophony of colliding tools, came from her front porch. Leo had arrived. She smoothed down her floral dress, a nervous flutter in her chest. It had been years since a strange man had crossed her threshold, and the thought stirred a mix of apprehension and an emotion she couldn't quite name. Agnes watched through the lace-curtained window as a young man wrestled a large, overflowing toolbox onto the porch. Sunlight glinted off his short, dark hair, and his shoulders strained against the fabric of his blue work shirt. He moved with an easy confidence that was foreign to her. He straightened, stretching his arms above his head with a groan that sounded more like a contented sigh. Agnes observed the way his eyes scanned the house, taking in the peeling paint and overgrown rose bushes with an appraising gaze. There was no judgment in his expression, only a quiet understanding. Taking a deep breath, Agnes opened the door. The porch boards creaked beneath her feet, announcing her presence. Leo turned, a wide, genuine smile spreading across his face. His eyes, the color of warm honey, crinkled at the corners. "Mrs. Willowbrook?" he asked, his voice a pleasant rumble. "Leo Maxwell, at your service." He extended a hand, his palm callous but clean. Hesitantly, Agnes placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, reassuring, and surprisingly warm. A jolt, small but undeniable, coursed through her. She quickly withdrew her hand, tucking it behind her back. "Mr. Maxwell," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Please come in." He stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the small entryway. He set down his toolbox with another clang, the sound echoing in the stillness of the house. Agnes cringed slightly. "So," Leo said, rubbing his hands together. "Leaky faucet, right? Let's have a look." He followed her into the kitchen, his gaze sweeping over the room. He paused at the sight of the chipped porcelain sink, the culprit faucet dripping steadily into its depths. Agnes stood back, watching as he knelt down, his movements fluid and efficient. He ran a finger along the corroded metal, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Old thing," he muttered more to himself than to her. "But nothing I can't handle." He glanced up at her, his smile returning. "Don't you worry, Mrs. Willowbrook. We'll have this fixed in no time." He reached into his toolbox, the metallic symphony starting up once more. Agnes, however, barely noticed, her attention fixed on the easy confidence radiating from the young man kneeling in her kitchen. It was a confidence she hadn't felt in decades. Fixing more than just a faucet. Leo knelt, the sink's chilled porcelain a stark contrast against the humid air of the kitchen. "All right, Mrs. Willowbrook, let's have a look." He produced a wrench, its polished surface flashing under the light, and began coaxing loose the aged pipes. The persistent plink, plink, plink faded, then ceased. A weighty silence descended, broken only by the metallic whispers of his work. "Thomas always handled the plumbing," Agnes murmured, her voice as fragile as spun glass. Settled on a chintz chair, her hands were clasped tight. "Had a real gift for it. Said it was like untangling a knot." Leo's gaze flickered upwards, noticing the faint curve of her lips, tinged with nostalgia. "Sounds like he was a handyman." "Indeed. He built that birdhouse out back, the one with the miniature porch. The robins adore it." A ghost of a smile flickered across her features, a brief visitation from happier days. He tightened a stubborn bolt. "I can imagine. Birdhouses are deceptively tricky. Get the proportions wrong and nobody moves in." He paused, leaning back. "Robins, huh? We're overrun with blue jays at my place. Rowdy bunch." A dry, rustling chuckle escaped Agnes. "Thomas used to shoo them away. Called them feathered thugs." Leo echoed her amusement, then resumed his task, replacing a Brita washer. The kitchen was spotless, each item in its designated space, not a mote of dust dared to settle. It spoke of a life meticulously curated, perhaps a touch too solitary. He caught the polite, almost apologetic smile she offered, a veneer that didn't quite reach her eyes. "All set," he announced, testing the faucet. A clear, unbroken stream gushed forth. "Good as new. Just a bad washer. Tiny things, but they can wreak havoc." Agnes rose stiffly, her hand seeking purchase on the countertop. "Thank you, Leo. I appreciate this so much. Any time, Mrs. Willowbrook. That's what I'm here for." Her knuckles were bone white as she clutched the edge. He longed to pierce the bubble of quiet grief surrounding her. "Say," he ventured, struck by an idea. "I'm making a run to the hardware store later. Need anything while I'm there? Some birdseed, maybe, for those robins?" A flicker of surprise lit her eyes. "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly." "Nonsense," Leo insisted, his tone gentle but firm. "It's no trouble at all. And it's the least I can do after that fantastic lemonade you made yesterday." He paused, adding with a wink, "Keeps the bullies away, you know." A genuine smile finally blossomed, chasing away the shadows clinging to her face. Well, she conceded, her voice gaining a little strength. Perhaps just a small bag. They do seem to have insatiable appetites. Leo grinned. Consider it done. He gathered his tools, a sense of satisfaction warming him. He'd patched up more than just a leaky faucet, he realized. He had mended a hairline fracture in Agnes Willowbrick's carefully constructed world. The wobbly step. Agnes nearly tripped. The porch step, she knew, was more treacherous than it looked. She'd been meaning to call someone, but the days bled into weeks, and the thought of strangers traipsing through Thomas's garden felt wrong. Whoa there! Leo's hand shot out, steadying her elbow. His touch was warm, reassuring. That step's got a nasty wobble. You could really hurt yourself, Agnes. She straightened, a flush rising in her cheeks, partly from the near fall, partly from his concern. It's been like that a while. I'm careful. Leo knelt, pressing on the wood. It groaned ominously. Careful only gets you so far. This is an accident waiting to happen. Got any tools? Agnes hesitated. Part of her wanted him gone. She craved the quiet solitude, the comfortable ache of Thomas's absence, undisturbed. But another part, a shriveled, neglected bud within her, felt a strange flutter at his offer. There might be some in the shed. Thomas kept everything. Great! Let's take a look. Leo was already heading toward the side of the house, his easy enthusiasm infectious. The shed was a dusty testament to Thomas's meticulousness. Everything was labeled and organized, from the smallest screws to the heavy-duty saws. Agnes felt a pang of sadness. He'd loved puttering in here. Leo emerged with a hammer, a crowbar, and a handful of nails. Looks like we're in business. He winked. Unless you'd rather I just call someone. Professionals and all that. Agnes looked at the wobbly step, then at Leo's earnest face. The thought of him leaving so soon deflated her a little. No, she said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. You can fix it. He grinned, and it was like sunshine breaking through the clouds. All right then. Let's get to it. He worked with a focused energy that Agnes found captivating. He pried at the old nails, his brow furrowed in concentration. The rhythmic hammering filled the air, a comforting sound that replaced the usual silence. She watched him, leaning against the porch railing, the scent of sawdust and damp earth filling her nostrils. Thomas always said this house needed constant attention, she said, more to herself than to Leo. He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. He sounds like a smart man. Old houses have character, but they need love too. He met her gaze, his eyes holding a depth of understanding that surprised her. Like people, I guess. Agnes looked away, suddenly self-conscious. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Leo hammered the last nail, tested the step, and then stood back, beaming. Good as new. Or at least good enough. Should last you until, well, a good long while. He gathered his tools, a small pile of splintered wood at his feet. Agnes noticed a smudge of dirt on his cheek. Thank you, Leo, she said, the words feeling inadequate. I appreciate it. He shrugged. No problem. Glad I could help. He hesitated, then glanced at the darkening sky. Well, I should probably get going. Agnes felt a flicker of disappointment. Would you like a cup of tea before you go? It's the least I can do. His face lit up. I'd like that very much, Agnes. Thank you. A sudden storm. Leo was whistling a jaunty tune as he chiseled away at the warped step, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap a cheerful counterpoint to the otherwise silent afternoon. He'd almost finished shaving off the rotted wood when a shadow fell across the porch, not from the old oak, but from something far more ominous. He glanced up. Dark clouds, bruised and heavy, were rolling in from the west, swallowing the sun whole. The air, thick with humidity, crackled with an unspoken threat. A low rumble echoed in the distance, and a gust of wind whipped through the overgrown garden, scattering leaves like confetti. Looks like we're in for it, Agnes said from the doorway, her voice barely audible above the rising wind. Leo nodded, quickly gathering his tools. Best get inside. This looks like more than just a drizzle. The first fat drops of rain splattered onto the porch, darkening the wood. They hurried inside, Leo grabbing the toolbox just before the downpour unleashed its fury. The living room, usually dim, was now illuminated by flashes of lightning that painted fleeting silver patterns on the walls. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the world outside into an impressionistic watercolor of grays and greens. Agnes busied herself lighting a fire in the hearth, the crackling flames offering a comforting warmth against the chill that had seeped into the old house. Leo watched her, noticing the way the firelight danced in her silver hair, softening the lines etched around her eyes. "Thank you, Leo," she said, turning to him with a small smile. "For fixing the step, and for everything." He shrugged, suddenly feeling awkward. "It's nothing, Agnes. Just doing what anyone would do." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the storm rage outside. The fire popped and hissed, throwing shadows that danced across the room. Finally, Agnes spoke, her voice soft. "Thomas used to love storms," she said, a wistful note in her voice. "He'd always make a pot of tea and tell stories." "Tell me one," Leo said, surprising himself with the invitation. Agnes hesitated, then a smile touched her lips. "All right," she said. "But don't say I didn't warn you. Thomas had a talent for exaggeration." She launched into a tale about a fishing trip gone awry, complete with a rogue wave, a lost oar, and a very grumpy seagull. Leo found himself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in what felt like ages. Agnes's eyes sparkled as she recounted the story, her voice animated and full of life. He, in turn, shared stories of his own. Tales of clumsy attempts at carpentry, of near disasters with rogue lawnmowers, and the time he tried to bake a cake for his sister's birthday and ended up setting off the smoke alarm. As the storm raged outside, inside the cozy living room, a different kind of storm was brewing, a connection, unexpected and undeniable. The shared laughter, the comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding that passed between them, it was all building, like the pressure before a thunderclap. Leo found himself drawn to Agnes, not just out of pity or kindness, but with a deeper, more profound feeling he couldn't quite name. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a grieving widow, but a vibrant woman with a lifetime of stories to tell. And he realized he wanted to hear them all. A brush of hands. Agnes shuffled through a stack of photographs, their edges softened with age and handling. "Here," she said, her voice a little scratchy from disuse. "This was taken on our honeymoon. Thomas insisted we go to the coast, even though I'd always dreamed of Paris." She handed a faded image to Leo. A younger Agnes, radiant with happiness, stood beside a grinning Thomas, the churning sea behind them. Leo took the photo carefully. "You both look so happy." He studied the image, the affection palpable even through the grainy film. "He seemed like a wonderful man." Agnes smiled, a fragile thing that barely reached her eyes. "He was. Solid. Dependable. He could fix anything, you know. Just like you." She chuckled softly, the sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "Not that I ever needed much fixing." She continued to share, each photograph a tiny window into a life richly lived. There was Thomas coaching a little league team, Thomas carving a pumpkin with a ridiculously oversized knife, Thomas asleep in a hammock with a book resting on his chest. With each image, Agnes's voice grew stronger, the memories breathing life back into her weary soul. Leo listened patiently, offering small, encouraging noises, his presence a warm, quiet anchor in the room. He learned about Thomas's bad jokes, his love for gardening, his unwavering loyalty to the Chicago Cubs. He saw Agnes not just as a grieving widow, but as a woman who had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. Suddenly, Leo, leaning back a little too far, bumped against a small, rickety side table. The table wobbled, and the remaining photographs cascaded to the floor in a flurry of sepia tones and whispered memories. "Oh dear!" Agnes gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I'm so sorry! Leo exclaimed, instantly kneeling to help gather the scattered images. He scooped up a handful, his fingers brushing against Agnes's as they both reached for the same photograph, a portrait of Thomas in his younger days, his eyes full of mischief. A jolt, unexpected and undeniable, shot through Agnes. It wasn't painful, more like a spark of static electricity. Her breath hitched in her throat. She looked up, her gaze meeting Leo's. His eyes, usually so bright and cheerful, were clouded with concern. He quickly withdrew his hand. I'm so sorry, he repeated, his cheeks flushing a faint pink. He quickly busied himself with the remaining photographs, avoiding her gaze. Agnes found herself unable to speak, her heart hammering against her ribs. It had been years since she'd felt anything like that unexpected flutter, that sudden awareness of another person's touch. It was disconcerting, unsettling, and strangely exhilarating. They finished gathering the photographs in silence, the air thick with unspoken feelings. Leo carefully stacked the images on the table, his movements deliberate, almost clumsy. Well, he said finally, breaking the silence, I should probably get back to work. The gutters aren't going to clean themselves. He gave her a quick, awkward smile. Thank you for sharing these with me, Agnes. He sounds like he was a truly special man. Agnes managed a weak smile in return. Thank you, Leo, for listening. He hesitated at the door, his hand on the knob. I'll be back tomorrow to finish up. I'd like that, Agnes said softly, her eyes following him as he disappeared out the door. She stood there for a long moment, her hand hovering over the stack of photographs. The memory of that fleeting touch lingered, a warm ghost on her skin. The silence in the house felt different now, less empty, more expectant. Conflicted emotions. The unexpected warmth of his hands sent a jolt through Agnes. It wasn't just the physical contact, though that was surprising enough after so long. It was the kindness radiating from Leo, the genuine concern etched on his face. He held on a fraction longer than necessary, his thumbs gently stroking the back of her hands, and a strange, fluttery feeling bloomed in her chest. A feeling she hadn't felt in years. She pulled away abruptly, a blush creeping up her neck. Thank you, Leo, she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. The steps suddenly seemed treacherous, the garden overgrown and accusing. The image of Thomas, his face etched with the gentle lines of time, flashed in her mind. He wouldn't have begrudged her a simple act of kindness, would he? But this felt different. This felt like a betrayal of some sacred vow she hadn't even realized she'd made. Are you all right, Mrs. Willowbrook? Leo's brow furrowed with concern. Perfectly fine, she insisted, a little too quickly. She busied herself brushing imaginary dust from her skirt, avoiding his gaze. The age difference suddenly seemed vast and insurmountable, a chasm carved by societal expectations and the ghosts of her past. What was she thinking, even entertaining such a thing? He was young, vibrant, full of life. She was a widow, clinging to the remnants of a life that no longer existed. He seemed to sense her unease. Just one more step, he said, his voice carefully neutral. He turned his attention to the loose brick, levering it into place with a practiced ease. The rhythmic tap of his hammer was the only sound for a moment, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within her. When he finished, he straightened up, wiping his hands on a cloth he pulled from his pocket. There you go. That should hold for a good while. He avoided looking directly at her, his gaze fixed on the garden beyond. Thank you, Leo. I appreciate it. Agnes fumbled with the clasp of her purse, searching for her coin purse. Don't worry about it, Mrs. Willowbrook. It was just a small thing. He started gathering his tools, packing them neatly into his toolbox. The air crackled with unspoken words, with the weight of what hadn't been said, what couldn't be said. I insist, Agnes said, finally finding the coin purse. She pressed a few crumpled notes into his hand. He hesitated for a moment, then closed his fingers around them. Well, thank you, he said softly. I should be going. I have another job over on Willow Creek Road. He hefted his toolbox. Is there anything else I can do for you before I leave? Agnes shook her head. No. Everything's fine. Thank you again, Leo. She forced a smile, but it felt brittle and unnatural. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Take care, Mrs. Willowbrook. He turned and walked down the path, his shoulders slightly slumped. Agnes watched him go, a knot tightening in her stomach. She had driven him away, hadn't she? Scared him off with her sudden coldness. But what else could she have done? The path she'd almost stepped onto was forbidden. The apple pie. The scent of cinnamon clung to Leo's clothes like a second skin. He hummed a tuneless melody, kneading the dough on his kitchen counter, a far cry from the usual chaos of the bakery. Day wasn't about sourdough or rye, it was about apples, butter, and a memory. Agnes had mentioned, almost in passing, how Thomas adored her apple pie. A simple sentence, yet it painted a vivid picture of a shared life, a love seasoned with sweetness. He halved the dough, pressing one portion into the pie dish, its edges crimped with meticulous care. Later, at the bakery, the ovens roared, a comforting backdrop to the morning rush. Sarah watched Leo, her brow furrowed slightly. You seem distracted, she observed, wiping flour from her hands. Leo hesitated, then plunged in. It's Agnes. Mrs. Willowbrook. I feel like I might have overstepped. He recounted the visit, the hand-holding, the raw vulnerability in her eyes. I don't want her to think I'm trying to take advantage. Sarah leaned against the counter, her gaze thoughtful. Leo, you have a good heart. But sometimes. She paused, choosing her words carefully. People need more than just a quick fix. They need companionship. Time. She gestured towards the almost finished pie cooling on a rack. That pie, that's time. It's saying, I remember, I care. He considered her words, the aroma of baking apples swirling around him. So, you think I should bring it over? Sarah smiled, a genuine, warm smile. I think you should trust your instincts. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Agnes's porch as Leo approached, the pie nestled securely in his hands. He hesitated at the door, a sudden wave of nervousness washing over him. He hadn't felt this apprehensive since asking Eliza Miller to the prom. He took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened slowly, revealing Agnes, her face etched with weariness. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him. Leo, she said, her voice a hushed whisper. He held out the pie. I baked this. Apple pie. You mentioned Thomas loved it. I thought, maybe you'd like some company while you ate it. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry if I overstepped the other day. I hate seeing you so alone. Agnes looked at the pie, then back at Leo, her expression unreadable. A long moment stretched between them, filled only with the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. Then, a faint smile touched her lips. Come in, Leo, she said, stepping aside. I'll put on some tea. An unlikely friendship. Agnes's breath hitched. The warmth of Leo's hands, calloused yet gentle, lingered on hers like a phantom limb. She hadn't felt such a spark not since Thomas. Her cheeks flushed, a sensation she hadn't experienced in what felt like decades. Tea? The word escaped her before she could fully process it. Would you like to come in for tea, Mr. Maxwell? Leo's face lit up, a genuine, unguarded smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I'd like that very much, Mrs. Willowbrook. Please call me Leo. He released her hands, but the connection, the shared moment, hung in the air. She led him through the overgrown rose bushes, their thorns thankfully subdued after yesterday's pruning. The house felt different with someone else inside, lighter somehow. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sun streaming through the lace curtains, illuminating a space that had felt perpetually shadowed since Thomas's passing. Agnes busied herself in the kitchen, the familiar routine strangely comforting. The kettle whistled, a cheerful sound that seemed to bounce off the otherwise silent walls. She laid out her best china, a delicate floral pattern that Thomas had given her on their anniversary. Using it again felt like a small act of defiance against the lingering grief. Leo settled at the kitchen table, observing her with quiet curiosity. "This is a lovely home, Mrs. Willowbrook." "Agnes." "Thank you, Leo," she replied, pouring the tea. "It's been quiet lately." They talked, hesitantly at first, then with increasing ease. Leo spoke of his work, his dreams of opening his own woodworking shop, his love for the old houses in town, and the stories they held. Agnes, in turn, found herself sharing memories of Thomas, stories she hadn't dared utter aloud in months. She spoke of their travels, their shared love of gardening, the quiet evenings spent reading by the fire. With each shared memory, the weight on her chest seemed to lighten. Leo listened with genuine empathy, never interrupting, never offering platitudes, simply bearing witness to her grief and her joy. He didn't try to fix her, just accepted her as she was, a woman weathered by loss but still capable of warmth. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation flowed effortlessly. They discovered a shared love of old movies and a mutual disdain for reality television. Agnes even found herself laughing, a genuine, unforced laugh that surprised her with its suddenness. From across the street, Martha Jenkins peered through her lace curtains, her brow furrowed in concern. She'd seen Leo arrive, had watched him talking to Agnes in the garden. Martha had been keeping a close eye on Agnes ever since Thomas's passing. She meant well, of course, but her concern often manifested as overbearing interference. This new development, this young man entering Agnes's life, made her uneasy. Back in the kitchen, Agnes poured another cup of tea. "I haven't enjoyed an afternoon like this in I can't remember how long." Leo smiled, his eyes crinkling again. "Me neither, Agnes." "Me neither." As Leo finally stood to leave, Agnes felt a pang of disappointment. The house would feel empty again, the silence amplified. But something had shifted within her, a small spark of hope ignited in the darkness. "Thank you, Leo," she said, walking him to the door. "For the tea, and the company." "Any time, Agnes," he replied, his voice sincere. Maybe I could come by again next week? We could tackle those overgrown bushes in the back." Agnes smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile. "I'd like that very much."